So, Toby, we'll just get started then. And as people come in, and if you want to introduce yourself in the chat, where you're coming from, what you do. But welcome to a Paper Giants and Goby Ministry webinar collab on mental health. My name is Micah Stevens, and with me is the all-powerful Toby Slough. Toby, thanks for being here, man.
Hey man, I'm glad to be here with you guys today. If you come in, because Mike and I are so rookie when it comes to Riverside. When you come in, if you just over in the chat can say, "Hey, I'm here,"
Right.
so we'll be able to holler at you. And if you got here early, sorry, Catherine, that you had to listen to us discuss old people's medical issues. But this is interesting. I was telling Mikey the other day. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Toby Slough, and I was diagnosed almost 30 years ago with an anxiety and panic disorder in a time in history that most people had never heard the word anxiety. I hadn't, and we didn't know much about depression. It wasn't part of our language. It was nothing. Hi, Jacqueline. It was nothing like what it is today. There was no language around. I knew no one who'd ever been to a counselor. And so I had to learn over the past 28 years what Jesus really offers us, which is different than what I think most of us are told, and learn what he offers that's better and how we can help people who are struggling. I think we can all agree that the Capital C Church, generally speaking, as we haven't done that great a job in the area of mental health, we've kind of laid it under the topic of, man, pray harder, study the Bible more, get in a small group, trust God more, have more faith. And the fact of the matter is people ask me all the time, hey, what do you have to be anxious about? And the answer is nothing. I have a disorder, which means I think things up. It's not situational anxiety, which is a whole nother issue. It is a disorder that lots of us have to fight through. The stats of what's happening today are staggering in this area. Many have, as you guys know, are. I'm not a unicorn anymore. I'm definitely a part of the majority of Americans at some level who battle anxiety or depression or feeling overwhelmed by life. I get a big question almost everywhere we go about why do you think it's so bad today? And I would say we're in a perfect storm in that we just went through, a pandemic where I tell the story of my daughter, Bailey, who's on this call, her son going to school the first year, being told every day not to touch somebody, not to sit by them, or he could die. And I think about what that does to a kid's brain developmentally, along with the fact that parents were honest about it. We weren't doing very well either in that season. And you mix into that soup a cancel culture and social media, which is the thing that most people want to talk to me about. Social media is having a great negative effect on our kids today. I keep thinking back to what was it, Mike, in the 60s when there was these huge lawsuits between cigarette companies and the government who was trying to crack down on them for marketing to kids, and literally people believing that there was no harm coming out of cigarettes in the 60s. I think social media will be that for us at some point. You mix all of that together and you come to where we are today. And the best that we have come up with in our culture today are fidget spinners and weighted blankets, which I'm not against either one of those things, but we both know they don't provide any answers. And so for us, for our kids, we've got to begin to understand what Jesus really offers us is freedom. And freedom is not the absence of these issues. It is the person of Jesus with us, helping us overcome in the midst of these issues. It is the opportunity before us to connect to God's power like never before. But we have to recognize there's an issue on one hand. The other side of it, we have to be the ones who do not believe the sky is falling. Heaven isn't panicking about our panic. God's not depressed about our depression. He just wants to work. He wants to use this to help us reach people. I think the gospel, the good news that Jesus helps those who can't help themselves, packaged around mental health. I think we have an opportunity to win our world like never before if we'll get serious about talking about these issues. But we need to understand the problem. Mike, I don't know if I flash this up there on Mother's Day. I have this this wound. On Mother's Day, I cut off the end of my thumb with a mandolin slicer. It's a whole story about how dumb I am. But the fact of the matter is, I spent a lot of time the first couple of days thinking about regretting the mistake I'd made. I know better. I cook that's my greatest hobby. I know what I'm doing, and I lived in regret. And I think that's interesting because we have so many people who are wounded mentally who live in regret at some level. They say this to me: I know I shouldn't feel this way. And my answer to that is, who told you you shouldn't feel this way? Who told you that at times life is not a bit depressing, that at times there are things in your life that will cause you to be anxious at some level? The other thing I've learned dealing with this over the last week or so is that, you kind of need your right thumb. If you're right-handed, you use it quite often. There's a muscle memory that is built, whether it's, buttoning your shirt. I mean, I could go through a list of things that I have had to relearn a new way to do them. And the fact of the matter is, our mental health struggles begin to create muscle memory in us to operate in a way that we're going to have to unlearn and relearn over time. And I can even spend my time mad about being dumb enough to do something like this and frustrated that I can't do things as fast as I could, or I can use my energy toward learning a different way of living. And I think this is what's got to happen in our local churches. Part of what we do when you begin to listen carefully to how we're teaching, and I'm speaking in generalities, I think it's better than it's been. I'm not here to hammer anyone, but I think a lot of our talk is about what I just said. I think a lot of our talk is about, here's ways to keep from cutting your finger, as opposed to, you've cut your finger. Now, where do we go from here? Does that make sense, Micah?
Absolutely. It makes a ton of sense. And so thank you for setting the groundwork for us. And this conversation has been had for a while. You told me, and I'd love to hear more about it from you, but you recently told me that, I don't know if it was from the American Pediatrics Association, but there's more or as much mental health than there is physical health issues. Can you expound on that a little bit?
Yeah, the AMA came out and said that for the first time in America's history, that there are more challenges and diagnoses that are coming about mental health than physical health. It's a bigger issue than our physical health. For the first time in the history of our nation, that 500 adolescents a day are being admitted, not seen. It's an important distinction. Admitted into hospitals for mental health issues. Our kids are not coping very well with it, and our parents are not equipped to help our kids learn ways to operate through, in spite of the struggles that they're facing.
No, and it's on the minds of any parent that's remotely engaged with their children or engaged with their children's friends. So my question is, holistically for the church, how can we help? How can we be a part of this conversation, bring value, bring content? That's really the conversation that I'd like to have today.
Yeah.
And so for you is just to start this off, what would you say a church should start doing if they're not doing this, and what should they stop doing? Just 1-2 things. They should start doing this if they're not doing it, and what should they stop doing if they are doing that? That you think would bring the most value and the most pain in this mental health nuanced spectrum conversation. What can the church do to be a part?
Well, they need to start talking about mental health using stories like the prophet Elijah, who wanted to die. I mean, we need to start teaching and normalizing the conversation around mental health. That's the first thing we need to start doing, is having these conversations. The second thing that we've got to do is we have to resource our people at an age appropriate level over a period of time. Micah, studies show that the most significant change that happens in people's lives happens in small things done consistently over time. And I think one of the mistakes, quite honestly, that churches are making is mental health is kind of a one and done thing for them. It's hey, here's during Mental Health Month, we're going to talk about mental health one weekend, or we're going to do a series a year. Instead of looking for ways when you're talking about stewardship to talk about the stress and the mental health issues that come along with that. And instead of when you're talking about marriage, making sure that one of the things that you're talking about is how depression is a leading cause of the deterioration of marriage. I mean, I could go on and on, but looking for ways to bring it out on a regular basis. And number two, then people need strategies more than they need sermons. They need, like, okay, it's great that you're telling me, we can talk about this in a moment if you want to, but identity is one of these big issues. It's that it's we'll never get our mental health right until we understand who God says that we are. And, instead of saying, hey, you got to know who you are, we have to teach people practically, how do you begin to build a sense of identity in you? We need those practical tools and practical ways that we can resource our people. I think people want, in today's world, one of the greatest resources the church can be is a resource of curated articles, of things that are being said out there about these issues. Here's the thing, man. Your mamas and daddies are talking about this in car pickup lines and at birthday parties. Everybody's talking about this. What we have to stop doing is being afraid of beginning the conversation. Quite honestly, I think so many leaders are intimidated by this. Will kind of open up, we're going to kind of open the box, and now we're going to have a lot of issues that we can't deal with. And my answer to that is you will. And so, one of the things Goby has done is put together some resources so that churches don't feel like they have to do it all themselves. But I think if we just start talking about it in contextually, it's different for elementary age parents than it is for high school parents. It's different for grandparents, which, by the way, is a huge growing audience for Goby that we never intended. It was just parents of adult kids and grandparents started coming out saying, man, we want to add value into our grandkids' lives. We don't want to be at odds with our adult kids and say things we shouldn't be saying. So educate us in the area of mental health so we can be a help in our families. And when we take a holistic approach, how do we help students? How do we help young adults? How do we help grandparents? How do we help families at every age level, and begin to resource them consistently over time? You become known in your community as the place that people go for mental health. It doesn't have to dominate. It just has to regularly be sprinkled into what you do.
Wow. That's sorry. I sometimes you pause and I can't hear everything that you said, but
Yeah.
I loved that you said, because that was even a question that I have as we try to serve churches and we're trying to work through all these things. How do you not just do a series annually, but when you talk about anything that you bring up, that anxiety is this constant, like, angel or demon on the shoulder of, hey, if you ask me to do something, overwhelmed feelings or anxiety or where this stuff's going to come from. So when you, again, but you said as well, it doesn't have to dominate. You don't want to become potentially the mental health church that's all we talk about, and it becomes this, black cloud over every message. And so I think that's really interesting when you say, hey, anything, when you talk about it, just bring up the thing that we're all thinking of and we're all feeling, and everybody reacts to an overwhelmed thing differently. But that's a really interesting thing that you said.
Yeah, I think too, let me say this. You have three major issues, and this is something I teach church staffs. I teach in business settings, you have three main issues when it comes to your mental health. The first one is isolation. That's your greatest enemy. Isolation is you have God created you to be fully loved. And at some level, everyone has a fear that if they're fully known, they won't be fully loved.
Mm.
And so isolation isn't about are people around, are you an introvert or an extrovert? It's, there's at least a couple of relationships in your life where people know everything and love you anyway. That's your safe place. And so when we talk about relationships and friendships, we're talking about mental health if we'll just position it in that way. The second one that we have, I said a moment ago, is identity. You can take every cultural issue that we're dealing with today, and foundationally, it's an identity issue. And it's saying this, it's saying that what you feel controls what you know instead of letting what you know control what you feel. In other words, it must be true because it feels so true. And it plays all the way out on the West Coast, a place that we were, where kids were checking on the box in elementary school that they were identifying as a cat. Now think about that. They feel like a cat. So, okay, be a cat. Where does that lead us? Right. But it's also the issue of what do you do when with the tension of I am a conqueror. That's who God says that I am, but I'm not conquering in this moment, right? So I have a position in the kingdom, but then I also have a current condition. And the thing is teaching our people how to not lower their position to match their condition, but to lower their condition to raise it to their position. I could go on, but when you talk about identity and you talk about this need to be loved, and then thirdly, it's about input, which we all understand in the church, because in the church, it used to be about sex, drugs, and rock and roll, or R-rated movies, or pick your thing that was like a morality issue. What we're dealing with today is the church is full of conspiracy theorists. The church is full of people who are convinced that there's a bigger story going on. The church is filled with people who are being told daily, if you don't act like, vote like, respond like I do, then I'm going to cancel you. That's culture. And so in social media and in network news, pick your platform out there, we're being inundated with input that it's not just wrong. It's not like black and white. It's like, it's not good for you. It's not speaking life over you. And so how do we help families, students, young adults? How do we help them build a plan that says, I'm going to get a regular dose in my life of this because it speaks life and keeps me mentally healthy? I can't begin to describe to you. We've been with now over 80,000 in person around the country, 24 states that we've been in. And my one non-negotiable is I'm going to sign books, not because I like to sign books. It seems kind of weird, but I want to talk to people. And when I'm talking to people, I get men especially who come to talk to me about these issues that they're having. And I'll go something like, well, you seem to be angry. Well, I am. And they'll start spouting stuff they've read on the internet. And I'm like, hey, man, the first step towards your mental health is like, turn off Twitter and read the Bible. Find something that's going to lift you up and fill you up. Hey, that's something we can all talk about, but let's talk about it in terms of, man, this isn't good for your mental health. Not just that's bad.
Right. No, it's so good.
So you have those three areas.
That's so identity. Good. And just a reminder, if you are in the chats and you have a question for Toby or myself, please throw a question in here and we'll try to get to those as they come. But Toby, that's so great. And I love when you talk about the position and how we feel. And if it feels, it must be true because it feels, and some people feel so deeply. They feel so, it's such a tactile thing for them. How can it not be true that I feel it, I see it, and they just, and so when you were first diagnosed and, you're spiraling, and it's a different time. to be sure. But if you could remember back, what would someone or a church could have done to reach out to you or create a space for you to raise your hand or to do something? And how could you have been helped in the current state before you had to kind of do your own and navigate your own health journey?
Yeah, that's a great question. One thing is at a leadership level, I was the pastor at that point. So, I mean, I'm putting some of this on me, but there hadn't been a verbalization among a leader of a struggle. I was going to be the first one. And who wants to go first? Have a question and answer deal, and nobody raised their hand until somebody asked a question. And so if we would have had some leaders in our church that were talking about not their struggles being in the past and how they fixed them all, but hey, man, this is still a battle for me. I mean, Me Too is still one of the most powerful things out there. I realize people all over the country want to talk to me, and it's not because it's me, it's because they've seen a public figure who's been honest about his struggle, and it makes them open. And so the first thing I think is what I needed was just another person. And then I need somebody to point me to resources. I go back to this whole thing of telling somebody to love God is fine. Telling somebody how to build a relationship so that they love God is much better than just a principle. People need practical strategies into how to deal with these things. And that's what I had to, the last 28 years, Micah, that's been what my life has been. I had a provost of a university ask me, I was talking to fraternities and sororities for a while because they mandated it at a national level. And he asked me, have these tools been tested? And I said, yes, sir, they have. How long? I said, 27 years. Where? I said, in my own life. I didn't Google this stuff, right? I mean, it was stuff I had to start doing. I had to do with Bailey and Ross, and Bailey does it with her kids now. Ross does it with his kids. I mean, we had to find practical ways to take biblical principles and say, how do you set your mind on things above? How do you really do that? I mean, we're about to release a course that we filmed with you. I don't even know if you remember in Knoxville all those months ago, but it was on like how to pray for your kids. I don't think parents know how to pray for their kids other than just help them. And so it's like, man, here's 4 things you can pray for your kids. That's what the church has got to get, I think, better at is I think a lot of times, quite honestly, you didn't ask, but I'm going to tell you anyway. Pastors think, well, that's not deep enough. That's too simple. Jesus was simple. Simple doesn't mean shallow. It means simple, right?
So good.
And when we give people simple ways to begin to practice these things in their life, how do you build a culture of gratitude? If science says, which it does, is proven that there's a direct connection between a level of gratitude and mental health, how do you begin to build a culture of gratitude in your home? I think you do it with a gratitude chart where everybody every day has to write down something they're grateful for. And it just becomes a rhythm of your family. And over time, you learn how to be more grateful. And I mean, I could go on, but it's simple things, right? It's simple things. The churches utilize the tools out there that are the simplest. Bailey has taught me this. My daughter, who's in the chat, is as a mom of 3, if it's too big and overwhelming, she just won't do any of it. So let's give them practical ways they can start working through some of these things. I love this question from Catherine about.
Yeah, I just saw that. Go ahead and answer that, Toby.
Well, she's asking what are some open-ended questions to ask people surrounding mental health other than how are you really doing? What are some open-ended questions that parents can ask their kids? And I still am a huge believer in the high-low questions, that when we ask our kids high-low questions, like here's something I did with our staff, of over 50 of the staff when I was the lead pastor of a church during COVID, is we would start our meetings with every meeting. It was 3 pages on Zoom. And I would say, okay, in a moment on 3, we're all going to raise a finger from 1 to 5. 1 is I'm really struggling. I'm not doing well at all. And 5 is, man, I'm doing great. And so on 3, let's all put it up. And so 1, 2, 3, and people would put up, I'm a 2, I'm a 3, or whatever. And what we were looking for was these patterns of 1s and 2s. And then we needed to step in and provide some help. And I think this is what we can get into rhythm with kids. I think one of the greatest things you could build, Catherine, into children's ministry, whether it's through the check-in people or the kids, is, man, just this 1 to 5 thing. How are you doing? And I know I watch people in marriages that are using it. Scott Wilson talks about he and Jenny, and he walks into the door and he just gives her like this, like, okay, and so she knows, hey, I'm gonna give him a little space, and so I think that's just a real practical thing you can do, as well as high-low questions, which basically are, for those of you who aren't familiar, they're asking at a proper context for the age of a kid, what's the greatest thing going on in your life? What are you most excited about? And what are you the most worried about? And when you start hearing those regularly, again, you're not looking for events, you're looking for patterns. You're looking for patterns. Everybody's going to have a 2-day. Everybody's going to have a 1 day. But when you're having, somebody's having every week they're telling you 1, man, somebody needs to move in and have a conversation.
That's great. Catherine, I hope that was helpful. I love the 1 to 5. I'd forgotten that you had shared that. And like you said, it's simple. And oftentimes when in discipleship and relationships, we believe simple. And I love that you compare it to not deep. And it's like, that's not the case at all. No. Simple is just, it's easy, it's accessible. And it's something that a parent, that I believe one of the reasons is a lack of biblical literacy, and just they're so worried about what's happening. They react out of fear, and then they just spiral. And then when the parent's afraid, the kids are so intuitive and they feel so openly, they become afraid. And then we're just kind of swirling. So Toby, let's talk to like someone that you would say, if let's say they had the 1 to 5, and they've been having 1s for months on end, and they feel like they just can't get a hand up out of the cave, and can't. What would you say to those people, or the people on this chat that are leading some of those people? Like, we're in a hole right now. What are some practical ways to kind of get their equilibrium back up? Or what would you say before you need to get a professional involved? What can we do as people that aren't mental health professionals,
right,
do before, or the signs we need to see to get a professional involved?
Yeah, the biggest thing I would say is, and I think this is a huge mistake that we all make, but it's this: we need to realize that our job is to put people in a position to take responsibility for their own healing instead of taking responsibility ourselves. So when we see somebody struggling and we ask them about it, when we provide something, a tool, a strategy they can use, right? And say, hey, man, I know you're battling right now. Here's the 40 AMs. How about you take once a day and you look in the mirror and say this? So when you ask them again how they're doing, and when they tell you they haven't been doing the 40 IMs, you got to put that back on them, right? Yeah. And it's like the way we help people the most is hold them personally accountable to take responsibility for their own healing. The other thing I would say is we have to have the courage to allow some of the people that we really need the breaks they need. Maybe, hey, man, I want you to take 2 or 3 weeks off, work on this. And if you'll commit to doing this, then come back. Have a pastor friend who is jam-packed at I think 3 services, and was calling me to strategize about the 4th service. And he has 2 kids, 10 and 5 or something like that. And I said, here's my strategy. You're not going to do it, because it's gonna really affect your family. How about you get up from the church and say, I know we need this 4th service. We're in the middle of construction right now. Wow. But we're going to make a decision that's best for the families of our staff and our volunteers at this moment for their mental health, because we believe that's the greatest gift we can give our families is mentally healthy parents and adults. I said, model it for the church. And I think if you start modeling that in your ministry, that, hey, man, you're going to take responsibility for your own mental health. We're going to take responsibility to make sure that when you find yourself in the ditch, depleted, there's a way for you to get filled back up. Then we're going to see healthier, stronger leaders.
Wow. I love that. Keep it simple. But keeping them accountable for their own healing is such a powerful sentiment and belief. Because often for me, if I'm interacting with someone that I feel is really struggling, I almost want to help them more and give them a break and be like, don't worry about that. Let me take care of that. And then you end up, almost have a little bit of toxic charity, and they're not healing. You're not giving them practical tools, resources, and giving them the habits to help them get themselves out. And I just, I end up, that's how I would work. And so it's good for church leaders to hear, hey, the people under your care need to take accountability. You need to be able to see them and create spaces for them to be able to be psychologically safe to raise their hand. But once their hand is raised, they need to have stuff in their hands so that they can take accountability and responsibility for their own healing. I think that's fantastic. And so as we wrap up here, if there's any other questions, but if there's not, Pastor Toby, just share a little bit about Goby Ministries at large, what we can do to be a part of that. How can we follow along with what's happening and the tools that Goby Ministry are helping churches across the nation and even getting into the world? How can we follow along? What can we do? And what's the best way to jump in to the Goby Ministry ecosystem?
Yeah, if you go to our website, beagoby.com, you're going to find out that we want to help families. Why do we go after families? Because we know that if we reach that parents who won't be open to some of these things in their life will be open to tools to help their kids. Our goal is really to help adults, but we help adults by helping kids. So you'll see a commitment to help your family personally. The other thing is I want to be your partner in local churches. And so we've built Goby partnerships where we take a holistic approach, what I described a moment ago. You don't have to be the expert. You just have to be the champion. We'll take all the time to build monthly newsletters and small group questions for every age group in your church. We'll have 4 weeks of curriculum that you use once a quarter with all of your kids that is high quality curriculum. Training for staff, so 15-minute videos a quarter with some discussion questions for staff to begin to talk about their own personal mental health. So on an individual level, we have Team Goby, which is a monthly way that we give you tools and resources and equipment. But I'm really excited about being able to partner with churches overall. And so we kind of take that off the plate of the leaders where we're going to give you all of this that you can digitally deliver through your MailChimp or whatever you use to your different groups under your letterhead as a partner of Goby. It's coming from you, and you're saying in your community, hey, we're serious about helping you. And it's what I love about, we're the mental health arm of Paper Giants at some level.
That's right.
Is we've talked so much about that and what Mike and his team are doing for churches, like broadly about helping in student ministry and Sunday morning services and content areas. We're providing, not only we want to be a resource for Paper Giants, but we're trying to do that just in this specific field of mental health for churches out there so that you don't, I get it, man. I was a lead pastor for 30 plus years. It's like, I don't want you to do 3 series a year on mental health. I don't think that's the best way to approach it. I think you ought to take some time every year, but it's this reinforcing stuff that comes in every month behind the scenes that sends a message. Hey, these guys are serious about helping us.
That's awesome. Well, I appreciate it, Toby. I love you. You're a dear friend. I love what Goby's doing. Every conversation I have with church leaders that I believe you guys are on the fighting front for mental health. And not only that, but equipping the local church, as I think you and I both believe, is the hope of the world, and equipping them, strengthening them in this space, which I think we're just in the beginning of. And I'm excited for the ministry that we get to do. But I know it's scary for a lot of people and a lot of parents. And so we appreciate everybody that was on this call, Pastor, and Goby Ministries. We love you guys. Thank you so much for being a part.
Keep swimming, baby. We'll see you later. Take care.
See you guys.